She was forced to marry her stepsister's cruel Alpha King fiancé. Then everything changed. Shadows stretched across the castle walls like fingers reaching for those who dared to tread beneath them. Lady Seraphine stood at the balcony, her pale hands clutching the cold stone railing as the wind tangled her dark hair. The air smelled of rain and distant fires, and yet the stillness pressed upon her heavier than any storm. Tonight, her life would change forever. Seraphine's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. Her stepsister, Lady Alara, had been engaged to King Kale, the feared alpha ruler of the northern realm, known for his iron will and merciless nature. But the king's sudden decision to annul the engagement had left the court in turmoil. And the king's advisors, ever cunning, had found a replacement, Seraphine herself. By royal decree, she was to marry Kale in place of her stepsister. The thought made her stomach twist. She had grown up hearing tales of the Alpha King, stories of his power that chilled even the bravest knights. He was a man who demanded obedience, who ruled with fear and authority. And yet beneath that legend, rumors whispered of a curse that clung to him like a shadow, one that punished weakness and left him isolated even among his closest allies. Seraphine, a voice called sharply from behind. It was Lady Myra, one of the few attendants who still treated her with warmth rather than suspicion. "The carriage waits. You must prepare yourself." Seraphine turned, meeting Myra's worried eyes. "Prepare myself? How does one prepare to marry a man who strikes fear into the hearts of all he meets?" Myra placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you believe. Remember that. You are not a child anymore, and the king, perhaps he will see something in you that no one else has." Seraphine shook her head, unable to believe it. She was no match for Kale, a king who could bend men and nations to his will. And yet, deep in her chest, there was a spark of curiosity. Perhaps, she thought, it was human to wonder why someone so feared could also command such reverence. The carriage ride to Kale's fortress was long and silent. Outside, the landscape unfolded in waves of dark forests and rolling hills, cloaked in the shadows of twilight. Seraphine's fingers traced the edges of her cloak nervously, feeling the rough fabric beneath her touch. She tried to imagine the man she would meet, the man whose presence had already haunted her dreams. She imagined a towering figure, eyes like cold steel, and a voice that could bend even the strongest will. And yet, when the fortress came into view, all grandeur and shadow, she felt an unexpected thrill. The stone walls were black as midnight, their spires clawing at the sky. Lightning illuminated the battlements briefly, and in that flash, Seraphine saw the figure of a man standing upon them, tall, regal, and impossibly commanding. The wind whipped his cloak, and even from that distance she felt the pull of his gaze as if it were a magnet drawing her toward him. "Steady yourself, my lady," Myra whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "This is no ordinary man. He is a king. And you must remember, he fears nothing. Perhaps he will see in you what no one else does." Seraphine swallowed hard and nodded, though her stomach fluttered with dread. She did not know what awaited her inside those walls, only that nothing could prepare her for the meeting with Kale. The doors of the fortress opened with a groan, revealing the vast hall within. Torchlight flickered across the stone walls, casting long, shifting shadows. Servants and guards alike stood at attention, their eyes wary but respectful. And then, at the far end of the hall, he appeared. King Kale. He was even more imposing than the stories had claimed. Broad-shouldered, clad in dark armor that gleamed under the torchlight, his presence filled the room. His eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over Seraphine with a curiosity that made her pulse quicken. There was no warmth in his gaze, no hint of the kindness she longed to see, yet there was something else, something that made her heart catch. "You are Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice low and commanding, echoing slightly off the stone walls. "Your stepsister's replacement. The court tells me you are compliant." Seraphine lifted her chin, trying to appear confident. "I am willing to do my duty, your majesty," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Kale's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, and he took a step closer. "Duty," he repeated thoughtfully. "A curious word, most speak it, but few truly understand it. Are you willing to serve me or only to survive?" Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine. His words were like a challenge, a test of courage. And for a moment, she wondered what it would be like to defy him, to see if the man behind the legend could be human, flawed, perhaps tender. "You will learn soon enough," Kale said, turning abruptly. "You have duties to fulfill. We will begin your training at dawn." Seraphine was led to her chambers, a room both beautiful and foreboding. Heavy curtains blocked the moonlight, and the walls were lined with tapestries depicting battles, kings, and legends long past. She sank into the chair by the window, letting her thoughts drift. Why had fate chosen her for this path? She thought of her stepsister, of the life she had expected for herself, and of the power that Kale held, not just over the kingdom, but over every soul who lived within it. And yet, despite fear, there was a small flame of curiosity, a whisper that perhaps there was more to the Alpha King than his cruel reputation suggested. Night deepened, and with it, the weight of destiny. Seraphine lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the man she would meet in the morning. Every tale she had heard seemed small compared to the reality she had glimpsed tonight. She did not know whether to fear him or admire him, but she knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came with the roar of the castle bells and the chill of an icy wind that swept through the corridors. Seraphine dressed in the simple, yet elegant garments Kale's attendants had prepared for her. Every movement felt like stepping into another life, one in which she would be measured not by her kindness, but by her courage, her strength, and her ability to endure the scrutiny of a king. The training hall was vast, lit by torches that cast flickering shadows along the stone floors. Kale awaited her there, standing tall and unwavering, as though he had been expecting her for a lifetime. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers, and in that moment Seraphine felt the full weight of his presence. "Today," Kale began, "you will learn the rules of this court, not just manners and etiquette, but how to navigate power. You will learn that weakness is not tolerated, and that strength comes not from your arm, but from your mind and your heart." Seraphine swallowed, her pulse quickening. She nodded, determined to prove that she was more than a pawn, more than a replacement. Yet she could not deny the shiver of anticipation that ran through her whenever Kale's gaze fell upon her, sharp and assessing. Hours passed in a blur of lessons, of tests in etiquette, of observing the court, and of learning to hold her own in the presence of the Alpha King. Kale's eyes never left her, and each glance seemed to carry a weight she could not name. There was danger in his proximity, a tension that made her chest ache, but also a strange pull she could not resist. When the sun set once more, casting long shadows across the training hall, Seraphine found herself alone for a moment, catching her breath. Kale approached silently, stopping just a few feet away. "You surprised me today," he said quietly, almost as if confessing something forbidden. "Few have the courage to stand their ground before me, let alone maintain their dignity. You are unlike any woman I have known." Seraphine's heart fluttered. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, yet her tongue felt heavy. His gaze held hers, intense and unwavering, and she felt a warmth she had not expected, a spark that made her question everything she had thought about him. "Do not mistake this for weakness," Kale added, his voice lowering. "The court is dangerous. Every smile hides a dagger. Every word can betray. Remember this always." Seraphine nodded, feeling the weight of his warning and the pull of his presence at once. She did not yet understand Kale, and perhaps she never would. But in that moment she realized that this marriage, forced though it may be, would change her, and perhaps change him, forever. As she returned to her chambers that night, the castle seemed alive with whispers, shadows, and secrets. The wind outside rattled the windows, carrying with it a sense of fate and inevitability. Seraphine knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, mystery, and forbidden intrigue. Yet she could not deny the strange, fluttering hope that perhaps, in the darkness, she would find something more than survival. The Alpha King awaited her, and their destinies were now entwined, like two stars caught in the pull of an unseen force. And as she lay in bed, staring at the moonlight filtering through her curtains, Seraphine realized that she was no longer merely a girl bound by duty. She was a woman stepping into a world of shadows, power, and longing. And in that realization, she felt a thrill she could not name. The castle was alive with shadows, though not a single candle flickered along the empty hallways as Lady Seraphine made her way through its winding corridors. Every step echoed against the cold stone floors, a reminder that she was no longer merely a visitor in this place, but a part of it now. Kale's fortress was not just a home, it was a kingdom within walls, ruled by fear, discipline, and secrets. Servants scurried past, bowing their heads and whispering hurried greetings. The air smelled faintly of burning pine and damp stone, with a trace of something more subtle, almost like magic. Seraphine had felt it the moment she stepped into the castle, a quiet hum that seemed to resonate through the walls, as if the building itself were alive and watching. Kale had left her to settle into her new quarters after the first day of training. The lessons had been exhausting, learning the rules of etiquette, understanding how to command respect, and mastering the subtle art of reading the court's whispers. Yet it was not the learning that weighed on her most, but the constant awareness of the Alpha King's presence. Even when he was not in the room, Seraphine could feel his gaze lingering in every shadow, sharp and unyielding, measuring her every move. She leaned against the window, gazing out at the forest beyond the castle walls. The trees swayed in the night wind, their branches casting long, twisting shadows. Somewhere deep in the woods, an owl hooted, its call echoing across the hills. Seraphine could not help but wonder if the legends of Kale's curse were true, if some shadow of darkness truly clung to him, as the courtiers whispered. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Seraphine turned to see one of the castle attendants, a young man named Dorian, bowing slightly as he stepped inside. "My lady," he said quietly, "there is a message from the court. The king requests your presence in the council chamber at dawn." Seraphine's stomach tightened. Another day of tests, another chance to prove herself or fail. She nodded silently. "Thank you, Dorian." He hesitated for a moment as if he wanted to speak further, but then he left, leaving her alone once more. She could feel the tension building in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she could not name. Kale's world was not an easy one to enter, and yet she felt a strange pull toward it, toward him, as if the threads of their fates had already begun to intertwine. Morning arrived gray and cold, the sun a pale shadow behind the clouds. Seraphine made her way to the council chamber, her steps measured, her cloak trailing behind her. The hall was vast, with high ceilings and stone pillars that rose like the ribs of some ancient creature. Kale stood at the far end, surrounded by his advisors, his posture perfect, commanding, unyielding. When he saw her, his eyes flickered briefly, a flash of something almost human, before returning to their usual intensity. "You are punctual," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "A good beginning." Seraphine curtsied, though her mind raced with questions. The council chamber was no place for hesitation. Every word, every gesture would be observed and judged. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, but she held herself steady. The morning passed with lessons in diplomacy and strategy. Seraphine listened as Kale discussed matters of state, his voice steady and sharp. His advisors spoke in careful tones, but he ruled the room with authority, his presence demanding attention. Yet beneath the layers of control, Seraphine glimpsed something rare, a hint of doubt in Kale's eyes when a plan failed, a flicker of tension in his jaw when an advisor dared to disagree. During a brief pause, Seraphine found herself walking through the castle's inner courtyard. The stone paths were slick with morning dew, and the garden that had once been vibrant with flowers now looked almost ghostly in the pale light. Statues of past kings and queens watched silently, their faces frozen in stern expressions. She wondered if Cale saw himself in these statues, if he, too, was trapped by the weight of expectations and the burden of power. It was then that she first noticed the signs of the curse. A shadow moved differently in the courtyard, twisting and bending as if alive. The wind seemed to carry whispers she could almost understand. And in the far corner of the garden, she caught a glimpse of Cale standing beneath an ancient tree, his expression unreadable. He did not notice her at first, lost in his own thoughts, until a sudden gust of wind stirred the leaves and his gaze fell upon her. For a brief moment his eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat and she felt a warmth rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "Seraphine," he said quietly, his voice carrying over the rustle of leaves. "Do you see it?" She stepped closer, curious. "See what, Your Majesty?" "The curse," he replied, his gaze fixed on the shadow beneath the tree. "It lingers. Even now it watches. It tests me as it will test you." Seraphine shivered, both from fear and from the strange pull she felt toward him. "I don't understand," she admitted. Cale's expression hardened, and yet there was a hint of vulnerability beneath the mask. "Understanding comes with time. You must learn to see beyond what is visible. To survive here, you must be aware of both the seen and the unseen." The days that followed were filled with more lessons, more tests of her mind, her patience, and her courage. Seraphine learned to read the subtle shifts in the court, to sense danger before it arrived, and to anticipate Cale's moods, which could shift from cold indifference to sharp intensity in a heartbeat. And always Cale was there, watching, measuring, judging. Yet in rare moments, he revealed glimpses of something deeper, moments when his eyes lingered just a little longer, when his voice softened in ways that made Seraphine question everything she thought she knew about him. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the castle was bathed in twilight, Seraphine found herself in the library, poring over ancient texts that spoke of magic, curses, and forgotten kings. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, and the flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. Cale entered quietly, and she barely noticed him until he spoke. "You read with diligence," he said, his voice low. "Most would find these texts tedious, but you seek knowledge." Seraphine looked up, startled. I want to understand. If there is truth in these stories, I want to know it. About the curse, about the power you wield." Cale's eyes softened again, a fleeting moment of honesty breaking through the armor of command. "Knowledge is dangerous, Seraphine," he said, "but so is ignorance. You are wise to seek it." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Seraphine felt a connection, fragile yet undeniable, a thread pulling them together across the distance of fear and authority. But the castle was never truly safe. As night deepened, a shadow moved silently through the halls, an assassin, cloaked in darkness, seeking to strike at the heart of the kingdom. Seraphine, returning to her chambers, felt the sudden chill before she saw him. The glint of a blade, the hiss of a shadow, then a hand seized hers, pulling her into the safety of an alcove. Cale. His eyes blazed with a fury she had never seen before, and he struck with precision, every movement fluid, commanding, and lethal. When the danger passed, he stood before her, breathing heavily, his armor scuffed but his posture unbroken. "You must learn," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. "The world beyond these walls is unforgiving, and within these walls even more so. You are not safe, not yet. But I will not let harm come to you, Seraphine, not while I stand." Her chest heaved with adrenaline and awe. She had seen his power, his ruthlessness, and yet there was something in the way he had protected her, a flicker of something tender, something human. And in that fleeting moment, she realized that her fear was mingling with something else, something dangerous, something she could not name. The castle seemed quieter that night, yet the shadows had grown longer, deeper. Seraphine lay in bed, her mind racing with questions, fears, and strange, unbidden thoughts of the man she had once feared above all else. Kale was no longer just a king to her. He was a puzzle she longed to solve, a shadow she could not escape, a presence that made her heart both ache and soar. As sleep finally claimed her, she knew one thing with certainty. The Court of Shadows had claimed her as much as it had claimed Kale. And the deeper she stepped into this world, the more she understood that nothing would remain as it was, not for her, and not for the Alpha King she had been forced to marry. The next day would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new glimpses of the truth behind the legend. And Seraphine could not wait, nor could she turn away. The morning air was sharp with frost as Lady Seraphine walked through the castle corridors. Her cloak was heavy, and her boots echoed softly on the stone floors. Winter had come early to Kale's kingdom, and the snow outside painted the forest in ghostly white. The castle, with its high towers and endless halls, seemed colder now, more formidable, yet Seraphine felt a strange thrill with each step. The past days had changed her. She no longer trembled before the court, no longer felt the constant weight of fear in every glance from Kale or the whispers of advisors. Instead, she had begun to understand the rhythm of this place, the hidden rules, the dangers lurking in every shadow, the subtle power dynamics that governed every gesture. Yet the most mysterious thing of all remained Kale himself. He was as commanding as ever, yet there were moments when the hardness in his eyes softened, revealing a man who carried a burden heavier than any crown. Seraphine could see it in the way he moved through the halls, in the small, fleeting gestures no one else would notice. A hand brushing against a worn tapestry, a pause at a window overlooking the forest, a sigh when the council demanded impossible decisions. That morning she was summoned to Kale's private chamber. The room was grand, yet austere, with stone walls and tall windows that let in pale, winter sunlight. Kale stood by the hearth, his cloak draped over one shoulder, and as she entered, his eyes met hers with a sharp intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Seraphine," he said quietly, "you are learning faster than I expected, but understanding the court is only the beginning. There are secrets here, things you cannot yet imagine, that will test both your courage and your mind." Seraphine stepped closer, feeling the pull of his presence. "I am ready to learn," she said, her voice steady. "I want to understand everything. The court, your kingdom, even the curse, if you will let me." Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment silence stretched between them. Then he gestured toward a large, leather-bound book on a nearby table. "The curse is not merely mine," he said. "It is tied to the kingdom itself, to the blood of the rulers who came before me. It is ancient, unforgiving, and it feeds on weakness. To survive it, I have had to hide my heart, conceal my true self, and trust no one." Seraphine reached for the book, her fingers brushing the worn leather. "But you do trust me," she said softly. Kale's gaze flickered, a rare vulnerability breaking through his mask. "Trust is a dangerous thing," he said. "Yet there is something about you. Perhaps you are different. Perhaps you can see what no one else dares." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. She realized, with a strange mixture of awe and fear, that their fates were entwined far more deeply than she had ever imagined. And in that moment, she felt a shift inside herself, a determination to stand beside him, not as a pawn or a replacement, but as someone who might understand and perhaps even help the man behind the legend. The next days were filled with lessons unlike any before. Kale took her through the ancient halls, teaching her to read the subtle signs of danger, to sense the presence of hidden enemies, and to understand the ways in which power could be wielded without cruelty. He spoke of strategy and loyalty, of sacrifice and honor, and Seraphine absorbed every word, her mind sharpening with each passing day. Yet it was not only knowledge that she gained. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls between them began to shift. Kale's presence, once a source of fear, became something she could not resist. His eyes, dark and commanding, seemed to linger on her in moments of quiet, and though she tried to resist it, she felt a warmth whenever he was near. She caught him watching her sometimes, as if measuring her spirit, and in those fleeting glances, a connection grew, a bond neither of them could fully name or understand. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Seraphine found herself in the castle's hidden garden. The courtyard was blanketed in white, and the statues that had once seemed stern now looked almost gentle in the moonlight. She walked among them, her boots leaving tracks in the snow, and thought of Kale, of the man who inspired fear and awe, yet also carried a hidden sorrow she could sense even from afar. Kale appeared without sound, his figure emerging from the shadows like a phantom. "You should not be here alone," he said, his voice low, carrying both warning and concern. Seraphine turned, meeting his gaze. "I needed to see the garden, to think. The castle, it is vast and endless, and sometimes the walls feel like they close in." Kale studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The castle is a place of power, but also of solitude. Many who enter these halls never find what they seek. They are lost to fear, ambition, or the curse itself." "I don't want to be lost," Seraphine said quietly, her breath visible in the cold night air. "I want to understand, to see beyond the fear and the shadows." Kale took a step closer, the snow crunching under his boots. "And yet, to understand is to risk yourself. To see beyond the shadows is to face the darkness within." Their eyes met, and for a long moment the air between them felt charged, almost electric. Seraphine's heart thudded in her chest, a mixture of fear and longing, and she realized that she had crossed an invisible boundary. She was no longer merely observing the Alpha King. She was connected to him in a way that frightened and exhilarated her all at once. The quiet was broken by a sudden movement, a shadow flitting across the snow-covered courtyard. Kale's hand went to his sword instinctively, and Seraphine felt the familiar surge of fear and adrenaline. Yet this time, it was different. She did not retreat. Instead, she followed him silently, learning to move with the same careful precision, to read the unseen and anticipate the unknown. It was in that moment that she first glimpsed the true nature of Kale's curse. The shadow paused, almost sentient, shifting unnaturally, and Kale's eyes narrowed. "The curse tests all who enter this place," he whispered. "It is a living thing, feeding on doubt and weakness. Only by facing it can we hope to break it." Seraphine felt a chill run down her spine. She had known there was danger in the castle, but this was something beyond ordinary fear. And yet, standing beside Kale, she felt a strange courage rise within her, a courage born not from ignorance, but from the connection they had begun to forge. The shadow dissolved as quickly as it appeared, leaving a silence that pressed heavily against them. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable, and yet his eyes held a rare softness. "You are stronger than you realize," he said. "Stronger than any who have come before, but strength alone is not enough. You must learn to trust, to endure, and to see the truth within yourself." Seraphine nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that the lessons were not just about surviving the court or the curse, they were about transformation. The castle, the kingdom, and even Kale himself were mirrors, reflecting both her fears and her potential. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. Kale began to share fragments of his past, of battles fought and lost, of alliances broken, and of the isolation that had always accompanied his power. Seraphine listened, her heart aching with empathy, and yet she also felt a growing admiration. This was a man who bore the weight of a kingdom and a curse, and yet he moved forward with unwavering determination. And slowly, imperceptibly, Kale began to change as well. In her presence, the edges of his ruthlessness softened. He still commanded respect, still inspired awe and fear, but there were moments when his guard dropped. A lingering glance, a faint smile, a rare laugh at something she said. The curse still weighed upon him, yet she sensed that her presence was a small, flickering light, something that gave him hope, however fleeting. One night, as they stood together on the battlements, looking out over the snow-covered forest, Kale spoke quietly. "Seraphine, you have changed more than you know. The curse, it is not only my burden. It can consume anyone who enters this castle unprepared. Yet you have faced it with courage. And for the first time in many years, I feel hope." Seraphine looked at him, the cold wind tangling their cloaks, and felt a warmth in her chest. "Hope," she whispered, "is a dangerous thing, but perhaps sometimes it is worth the risk." Kale's gaze lingered on her, intense and unyielding. "Perhaps it is," he said. And in that moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink, as if the walls of fear and duty had been peeled away, leaving only truth and connection. But the castle was never truly safe. Even as they shared that fragile bond, a new threat stirred within the shadows, an enemy waiting, patient and silent, to strike at the heart of both the king and the woman who had dared to walk beside him. And as the wind howled through the towers and snowflakes danced in the moonlight, Seraphine realized that her journey was far from over. The bond she had forged with Kale was only the beginning, a fragile light in a world of shadows, a promise that together they might face whatever darkness awaited, and perhaps find redemption and transformation along the way. The next dawn would bring new tests, new challenges, and new revelations. And in the quiet moments before the world awoke, Seraphine understood a truth that would guide her through the trials ahead. The strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in darkness, in courage, and in the willingness to face the unknown together. The kingdom lay under a heavy gray sky, the wind carrying the promise of a coming storm. Lady Seraphine stood at the highest tower of Kale's castle, her cloak wrapped tightly around her. The snow that had fallen the night before had frozen into sharp crystals along the battlements, sparkling faintly under the weak sunlight. She could see the forest stretching endlessly beyond the walls, their trees dark and silent, a reminder that danger and uncertainty still lingered even in beauty. Kale appeared behind her, his steps silent against the stone floor. He stopped beside her, and for a moment neither spoke. The wind whipped their cloaks, carrying the scent of pine and frost. There was a tension in the air, a quiet awareness that the castle itself seemed to hold its breath. "Seraphine," Kale said finally, his voice low but steady, "today we face what the curse has threatened for generations. Today, the shadows that cling to this kingdom will rise, and you will stand with me." Seraphine turned to meet his gaze. She had grown stronger in the past weeks, stronger in mind and spirit. The lessons of the court, the dangers of the shadow, and the bond they had forged had tempered her courage like steel in fire. "I will stand with you," she said firmly. "We face it together." Kale's eyes softened, a rare, fleeting warmth breaking through the hardness he usually carried. "Together," he echoed. The hour came sooner than expected. From the forest, a dark force approached, a ripple of unnatural energy that seemed to distort the air. Seraphine felt the familiar shiver of fear, but it was tempered now by determination. She had faced shadows before, seen the hidden dangers of the court, and survived Kale's lessons. She was not a frightened girl anymore. The dark force reached the castle walls, twisting and shifting as if alive. Kale drew his sword, its steel gleaming in the cold light. Seraphine stood beside him, her own resolve steady, though she carried no weapon of her own. She knew her strength lay in courage and understanding, and in the bond she shared with him. The shadows attacked. They moved like living darkness, striking at the battlements and the gates, testing every guard and every defense. Kale's sword flashed through the air, cutting through the darkness with precision and power. Every movement was fluid, commanding, and decisive. Seraphine watched him, her heart racing, yet she felt no fear. Instead, she felt awe, respect, and a growing warmth that she could no longer deny. "You are ready," Kale said suddenly, his voice carrying over the chaos. "You must face the heart of the curse. Only there can it be broken." Seraphine nodded, swallowing hard. The heart of the curse was the tower's inner chamber, a place said to contain the shadow's source. She followed Kale, her steps careful but determined, feeling the weight of destiny pressing upon them both. The closer they came, the colder the air became, until it seemed to pierce through their very bones. The chamber was vast, dark, and silent, with walls etched in strange runes that glowed faintly with a silver light. At the center lay a swirling mass of shadows, a living darkness that pulsed with a heartbeat of its own. Seraphine felt it pressing against her mind, a whisper of fear, doubt, and despair. But she did not falter. Kale took her hand, a grounding touch, and she felt courage flowing through her, mingling with the bond that had grown between them. "Together," Kale said again, his eyes locked on hers. "Do not let it separate us." Seraphine nodded, and together they stepped into the chamber. The shadows lashed out, twisting and writhing, testing them, seeking to exploit any fear. Kale moved with unmatched skill, his sword slicing through darkness as if it were nothing more than mist. Yet it was not his skill alone that held them steady. It was the bond they shared, the trust and courage that flowed between them. Seraphine focused on the shadows, remembering Kale's lessons. They were not mindless, they fed on weakness, on doubt. And she would not allow herself to falter. She reached deep within, drawing strength from her own heart, from the bond they had built, and from the courage that had grown over countless lessons, dangers, and trials. The shadows hissed and twisted, reacting to her resolve. Kale's voice echoed in her mind, steady and calm. "Do not fear, we are stronger together." And then, in a burst of silver light, the darkness began to waver. The runes on the walls glowed brighter, responding to their combined will. Seraphine felt a surge of energy flow through her, mingling with Kale's power, and together they pressed forward. The curse's heart shuddered and roared, but it could not withstand the strength of two wills joined in courage, trust, and hope. With a final, blinding pulse of light, the shadows dissolved, evaporating into nothingness. The chamber was silent once more, save for the ragged breathing of the two who had faced the darkness. Kale lowered his sword, and for the first time his shoulders relaxed. He turned to Seraphine, his eyes filled with an emotion she had never seen so openly, relief, admiration, and a depth of gratitude that spoke louder than words. "You did it," he said softly, his hand brushing hers. "We did it." Seraphine smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. "We did," she echoed, and in that moment the weight of fear and doubt fell away. They had faced the curse together and emerged stronger, their bond unbroken, their hearts intertwined. The castle, too, seemed to breathe again, the walls no longer heavy with shadows, the halls alive with a quiet energy that had been absent for so long. Guards and servants peered from the corridors, their eyes wide with wonder at the sudden change, though none could yet understand the true source of the light that now seemed to touch every corner of the fortress. Days passed, and with each one the kingdom began to heal. The curse that had haunted Kale was gone, replaced by a new strength born of courage, trust, and love. Seraphine stood by his side as he met with his advisors, her confidence steady, her presence commanding respect. The court watched her in awe, recognizing not just a queen beside a king, but a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. And Kale was different too. The hardness in his eyes had softened, replaced with a warmth reserved for her alone. He still commanded respect, still ruled with authority, yet there was now a human side to him, a man who could feel hope and trust. Seraphine had seen his vulnerability, and he had seen hers, and together they had transformed not only their fates but the very soul of the kingdom. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, Kale led Seraphine to the castle's highest balcony. The wind carried the scent of pine and the distant forests, and the snow that had covered the land glimmered like silver in the fading light. "Seraphine," he said, his voice gentle yet steady, "we have faced the darkness together, and we have emerged stronger. I cannot imagine this kingdom or my life without you by my side." Seraphine reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Nor can I," she said softly. "We are no longer alone. The shadows are behind us, and together we can face whatever comes next." Kale's gaze lingered on her, dark and intense, yet filled with an emotion that left her breathless. "Together," he repeated, and this time it was not a warning nor a lesson but a promise. The wind stirred, carrying with it a sense of renewal. The kingdom, once shrouded in fear and darkness, now shimmered with light and possibility. And on that balcony, amidst the frost and the fading sunlight, Seraphine and Kale stood side by side, bound not by duty or fear, but by trust, courage, and a love that had grown in the shadows and emerged into light. Yet even as they held each other, a faint whisper of wind carried a reminder that the world beyond the castle was vast, unpredictable, and full of unseen challenges. But for now, they did not fear. They had faced darkness together, and they had emerged victorious, stronger, and united. In the days that followed, the kingdom flourished. Seraphine and Kale ruled together, their bond a beacon of hope and strength. The court respected her not just for her courage, but for the wisdom she had gained in the shadows. And Kale, once feared above all, became a king who inspired loyalty, trust, and admiration, tempered by the lessons of darkness and the light she had brought into his life. Their journey had begun in fear, but it had ended in strength. Together, they had faced curses, shadows, and doubt, and together they had discovered a love that was as enduring as it was transformative. And as the sun rose over the kingdom, casting golden light across the towers and forests, Seraphine knew one truth above all. The strongest hearts are forged not in comfort, but in darkness, courage, and unwavering trust. And hers, bound to Kale's, would face every challenge yet to come, together forever.